This is your place for all things Detroit Red Wings and all things Chicago Blackhawks. With your hosts, Jordan Linscott, David Barnhouse, Nick LePage, and Tim Stompanato. This is the Stick Blade Podcast. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of the Stick Blade Podcast. It is your place for all things Detroit Red Wings, all things Chicago Blackhawks, and news around the NHL. On tonight's show, there's no Wings and Hawks news. It's the off-season for both of these clubs as of this moment. The only thing going on right now is the Stanley Cup Finals, and what are finals? It's the Colorado Avalanche and the Tampa Bay Lightning going head-to-head. As of right now, it's Colorado up 2-0 over the Tampa Bay Lightning. The current game that they're playing right now, they have one goal on the board from Nichushkin. But anyway, I'm your host for tonight, Jordan Linscott, and I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Stompanato. Everybody, welcome to our show.
All right. Good to be here, Jordan. Yep, we've got the Stanley Cup Finals. We've also got the Calder Cup Finals for the AHL underway. Chicago Wolves are in the finals for that, so there is playoff hockey in Chicago. Not necessarily the Hawks, but I'll tell you what, I was at game 1 yesterday for the finals for the Wolves, and it is electrifying. The fans are going nuts. The barn is loud. You've got Skates, the mascot, shooting fireworks out of his hands. It's a gong show, but I absolutely love it. What a day.
Playoff hockey is so good. Like, I feel like we say this every week that we're watching like the playoffs, but playoff hockey is so good. Everybody elevates. The organizations elevate.
It's remarkable.
I mean,
there really is another level. Like, we've seen this countless times in the past where guys get paid and they're on contracts and they're okay in the regular season. And the justification is always they play playoff hockey. They're a playoff performer. And you're like, okay, why can't they be a regular season performer? But sure enough, you get into the playoffs where there's a little more room, there's a little more leeway. You start playing the lumber. You've got a little more physical game. There's a little more leeway on the penalties, and it's an endurance game. And all of a sudden, you've got guys that click in, and they just activate another gear in the playoffs. It doesn't matter what level you're at. It's the most remarkable thing I've seen.
Like, there's also those guys who they rise to the occasion when it comes to high pressure moments. Like, not to say that the regular season's not high pressure, because it is. All these clubs want to make the playoffs. Nobody's trying to take games off and miss and then be golfing in May. But when you've got your season on the line, you play just a little bit harder.
Well, I mean, we saw that even in the regular season where guys that had it was near the end of the season, teams that had their playoff spots locked in, maybe they were rolling a little more on the third and fourth line. Maybe they were putting some guys in to see what they've got, resting some of the big guns. There's a little lack of a sense of urgency. And you've also got your bottom teams that there's no way, they're mathematically eliminated. And so they're saying, okay, we're putting in young guys, try things out. There's no sense of urgency because it's all development. It's those bubble teams, right? It's those bubble teams that turn on some of the most electrifying hockey, because all of a sudden, especially when they're up against a team that's like in or out, but they're like, we lose one game, we could be out. There's nothing like it. Guys are pulling out stops you haven't seen in years.
No, it is. It's so unique how at the end of the regular season and into the playoffs, a lot of players they take that next step forward to be better. You're playing against the best of the best when you go into the postseason. So, like, everybody elevates.
Do you have a player on the Wings that you think of when you think of like playoff performer, regular season is whatever, but they were the epitome of playoffs? Do you have a guy that comes to mind for that?
I mean, I feel like for me, like,
because obviously your stars are great, regulars. Like, I don't think a Kane or Taze or anything like that, because they're just always good. But is there a guy that you think of for this was a playoff guy?
I mean, I feel Brendan Shanahan was a star, but like, he wasn't Steve Yzerman, he wasn't Nick Lidstrom, he wasn't Sergei Fedorov. But I really liked Brendan Shanahan. He seemed like he always stepped it up.
That's actually great that you say Shanahan, because I think of Brian Bickle.
Okay.
He's that like heavy power forward that really was almost more of a grinder at times. But he got into the playoffs and all of a sudden he was a little faster. He was muscling guys off the puck. He was scoring goals. Like he became this versatile, like a huge piece of our 2013 Cup run. He was fine in the regular season and he was fine after that. But like his playoff production, and again, like you said, there's the stars, Kane, Tays, Hosa, they were good all year round. Like they brought it to another gear, but they always have another gear. Brian Bickle was the one that I think of that all of us, they were unrecognizable, the difference between regular season and playoffs.
I mean, I'm trying to think, with this current Wings group that's existing, and we haven't really seen anybody on this roster except for Dylan Larkin playing in the playoffs. But
God, I forgot we even saw Larkin in the playoffs. That was a while ago.
yeah, his first season in the league, he saw the NHL playoffs. Now, grand first round exit, but
he's been hungry for it ever since.
I think when they finally do make the playoffs again, I think Larkin's going to elevate to a next level, and I really think Moritz Seider will too.
It's weird. We hear all the time about guys that are built for, or teams that are built for playoff hockey. And I think that's something that people get a little confused about. It's like, what does that mean? Like people say all the time, the Toronto Maple Leafs aren't built for playoff hockey. They've got phenomenal goal scorers, like, they're top six. They've got some of the best offensive firepower in the world. What does that mean? They're not built for playoff hockey. Like that's something that I try to define. But you're right. Moritz Seider, who has that offensive touch, but he's not going to get knocked off the puck as much. Both him and Dylan Larkin have a great two-way game. Playoffs are just a little heavier.
And the thing is, like, refs let stuff go in the playoffs. They may not let go in the regular season.
Some of the best reasoning I've heard is you don't want to give a weak call, or you don't want to have an outcome defined by the refs, defined by penalties. So unless it's egregious, unless it's reoccurring, unless you can't possibly look away from it, they really try to let things go a little bit more, which is frustrating for a guy like McDavid, who draws a ton of penalties. And that's a big part of his game, is using his speed to draw penalties. You have to reinvent that a little bit in the play. Like what happens when you're being strong-armed a little bit more, when you're not necessarily getting all those calls? What's next? How do you elevate your game to compensate for that? Not that McDavid has to elevate. I mean, my God, he's it's him. But you know what I mean?
Yeah. It's one of those things where once you get to the playoffs, you have to find something new to work with. If you're not just if you're just like a speedy, skilled guy, you need to find some other element to your game to be productive.
Exactly. You've got to be built to be able to carry the puck, to hold on to the puck, to not get knocked off of the puck. There's an endurance game to the playoffs. There's an endurance and balance game to the playoffs that you can get away with not having as much of in the regular season. I'll never forget I think it was the 2015 Cup run when the Ducks were we were in the Western Conference Final against the Ducks and then the Hawks, of course. Ryan Kessler made some comment like, nobody can withstand the amount that we're hitting these guys. We're just physically beating them into the ground. There's no way that they can, outlast that. And the Hawks did. Like, that's a remark. But by then, that team was war-forged and built for playoff hockey. They knew the score, and they just outwilled them. That's that intangible we go back to. That's what comes into play in the playoffs, is that intangible, that mindset, that will, that they don't know how to lose. They just keep pushing forward. That's the thing that I see missing on like some of these teams like Toronto that aren't built for playoff hockey. They don't figure out how to adjust.
It's kind of that thing, like there are players who they hate losing more than they like winning.
I love it. Have you seen the show Shoresy? That's a big part of Shoresy is, it doesn't matter if you like to win. Do you hate to lose? And that's those teams like the dynasty year Hawk teams, especially that 2015 team that had no business winning. We weren't that good anymore. Everyone was beaten down. Like, you've got a Duncan Keith playing 30 minutes a night. We've got 4 defensemen. We're missing 2 because they're all broken at this point. There was just never a concept of like, well, we've got all the, we've got injuries, we've got this, we're gonna go out there and fight. But like, they hated losing. There was no concept of giving in at that point. They willed themselves to that third cup. That mental fortitude is remarkable that you see in the playoffs.
I mean, we're kind of talking about willing themselves to win. The Colorado Avalanche versus the Lightning in this final. Talk about willing your team to win, man.
This is such a weird, because it goes again, like, if anyone knows how to win at this point, it's Tampa Bay. They have been through not only the highs, but they've also been through the adversity. They got swept a few years back. They knew how to bounce back from that. They adjusted. They've fought hard. They've adjusted from injuries. Steven Stamkos has been injured so often, and now he's back, and he's stronger than ever, both physically and mentally. And now they're down 1-0 into the third game, where they've already lost the first 2 games. That's almost mind-boggling to me, because yes, the Avalanche are playing like the better team right now, but sometimes that's not necessarily what gets you over the line.
I mean, and it was weird because like I felt like the first game was actually pretty close, and it was according to the scoreboard, right? Like Colorado wins 4-3 in overtime. You expect a result like that because Tampa's a juggernaut and Colorado's a juggernaut.
And that was a great game example, because if I remember that game correctly, the first game, the Avalanche had like the first 2 goals. Like, it was 2-0 for a while. And then Tampa roared back, and they were back and forth after that to get it to overtime. Like, that's what I expect from a playoff, like a team like that. But second game, Jordan, they lost 7-0.
It was a football game.
They lost by a touchdown. I get it. The Avalanche I think they were the best in the West. Totally. They were certainly the best in the Central. And I get it. You've got McKinnon, who's a top 5 player in the world. You've got Cale Makar, who's unreal. But their depth is a little questionable for forward, because especially with Nazem Kadri out, you've got that. You've got him missing, which is a serious hole. Your goaltending is questionable. Darcy Kemper's good,
but he's not elite.
Yeah, and he's I wouldn't argue he's even great. He's a good, serviceable goaltender, but that's not often enough. Like, seriously, against Vasilevsky, who just dueled out with Shesterkin. Like, you're kidding me, right? How does the firepower like, Jordan, what do you see? Like, what are you seeing that the Tampa's missing right now? Because I'm trying to rack my brain on what I'm seeing with the eye test.
I mean, you kind of saw it in the 7-0 game. It just seems like Colorado has this way of maintaining possession.
Yes, I agree with you.
Like, you could kind of watch it. I think it was like in the second or third period that it happened of that game. They had a turnover at the neutral zone. I think it was McKinnon dumped it in. Landeskog gets it at the boards, and they're just cycling the opponent's zone for almost 3 minutes straight. And you could tell, like, they were just passing it around until you get like a great shot, and you just tire everyone else out that way.
I mean, that's what the Hawks used to do when they were good. But yeah, it's the possession game, right? Like, it feels like this whole series, Tampa has been chasing the puck. Even though the last game, like, the shots were like 32-17 with Tampa. 17 shots is unreal for Tampa. Part of it has to be the fact that, think about the defensemen that Colorado has. Makar, Devontae's, Josh Manson, Eric Johnson, Bowen Byram. Like, that's about as good a decor as you can get, realistic. Like, they're missing Gerard. They would be even deeper if they weren't missing one of their legitimate top 4 defensemen.
Right.
Whereas with Tampa, you've got Hedman and Sergachev, And
who are
then,
both good
oh
defensemen.
my God, I mean, Hedman's multiple Norris Trophy winner. Sergachev's great, but then your next best are McDonough and Ryan McDonough, and I want to say Cernak.
Yeah, I think Cernak is still playing with the
Yeah,
Lightning.
I don't think they're on par. I love what McDonough brings, but I don't think they're on par to be able to match and blend with the rest of Colorado's defense. And you've just got so many strong. Nathan McKinnon is so good.
He's
I-
so
he
stupid good.
reminds me of Crosby.
Like, did you see that setup pass that he had on who was it, Nichushkin or was it Landeskog?
Well,
Where like
that
he literally blind, it literally looks like a Patrick Kane blind pass
he knew exactly.
spinorama.
Yep, he trusted. He knew exactly that they were going to be. And there's something to be said about that. That team is so in tune right now. And you brought up a great point in Nushkinen. Like, bought out by Dallas last year, had 0 goals for Dallas last year, and they said we're going to buy out this contract. We know when we've made a mistake. Total panic move. He signs in Colorado, actually gets top 6 minutes. He's who I'm thinking of this year as like, this is a playoff guy.
Mm-hmm.
This is a guy who decided to show up, and he's showed up in a big way. It's unreal to me, the impact that he's had. He is not a player I would have looked at and said, oh, they've got Nushkin. Like, of course he'll be able to chip in. I never even thought about him.
I mean, ex-Red Wing Darren Helm, yeah, he's at the end of his career, but he's actually been having a pretty good playoff with Colorado.
God, you're
Like
right. I forgot
when he
about
got
Helm.
slotted down to the third and fourth line, guess what? He's been really productive there. And I mean, we've kind of talked about this in the past, contract negotiations and allowing,
Yeah.
teams to get cheaper players, but $1 million for a bottom 6 player, that's very good value, especially when you've already got the high end pieces.
Yep, exactly. Colorado is doing a great job of everybody playing in a role where they're in the best possible position to succeed.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got the depth. Like, again, I don't think their depth is as good as Tampa, but they've got more depth this year than they've ever had in the past, even with Kadri out.
And I think that's the big takeaway this year is Colorado's not just got depth, their depth is performing. And
I mean, that's it, isn't it? All the depth in the world doesn't matter if the scoring dries up.
and not to bag on Toronto, but like that was our big knock on Toronto, right? Is the high, like your high end is super good. Where's your depth at? It's non-existent.
Yeah. And that's, if all you have to focus on is 1 or 2 lines, who steps up? And for Toronto, nobody stepped up. And we've seen that year after year. They are a top heavy team that you've got to count on your depth to at least protect and not get scored on. And their weaknesses get exposed. You're right, with a Darren Helm or with finding value in Ushkinen, Colorado has done a really good job of putting together a team that can not only hang and compete, but is actually dominating right now with Tampa. That said, Anthony Cirelli with Tampa just scored, so it's 1-1 right now.
Okay.
But still, this is going to be, again, I don't think either of us, because we talked about this before the show, Tampa's not getting swept. There's no way. Like, I can't believe that they would get swept. This game, this series is going to go a little longer than I think it looks right now, because Tampa will rally. I guess I think they do.
I mean, so was it the first 2 games are both home games for the Colorado Avalanche? You've got to assume that Tampa feeds off hometown momentum at least a little bit.
Absolutely.
I think the big tell though will be if they lose this first game at home. If they go down 3-0, I think the series is over. I have a hard time believing they're going to win 4 straight versus Colorado.
That's a good point. I think even if they win this one, if Colorado can take 1 on the road, they're in just such a good position at that point. I don't know. It's just unreal. I mean, this Tampa team, they're deeper than they've been. Like, obviously last year is the perfect example of super deep, but even then Stamkos was injured. for
Mm-hmm.
most of it. He was able to come out to score one goal and then hobble back to the bench. So he felt like he was a part of it. But this year, their top 6 and their top 9 are deeper and stronger. I mean, they've got Hagel, they've got Nick Paul. I think they have Braden Point back now. That's a huge boon to them. They've got Vasilevsky. I can't even think. I think Brian Elliott is the backup. So it's not like they've got a no-name backup goalie. Like this team is built to win. I love it. I absolutely love that. We have no idea how this is going to go right now.
And that's the crazy thing is like the 7-0 game for me, that was the one where I had to double take and be like, am I actually watching the Tampa Bay Lightning right now?
I did see a good hypothesis that they left Vasilevsky in because he wanted to at this point, the game was lost.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a matter of let me get in and start to really learn how they play, where they're shooting from, understand their playing style. This game's lost. Let me learn a little bit more. And sure enough, like it's almost the end of the first and it's 1-1. This is definitely the best first period so far in the finals that they've been able to get out of.
And
of course, I say that there's 5 minutes left. A lot can change in 5 minutes.
it is like, it's interesting to see that even though Tampa still has all of their fantastic players up top, and they did make some bolstering moves to their bottom, half of their roster, Colorado has just found a way to get more out of their depth.
Find a way to win. That is something that we hear in like every playoffs, every like winning team. And it's always, oh, what do you think contributes to your success? And like clockwork, every player's gonna say, oh, good teams find a way to win. We find a way to win. We don't give up. I think there's a lot of truth in that. It's that intangible that I always go back to. You adapt and okay, they're choking this. Okay, they're got a wall in the neutral zone. We can't do the normal like controlled zone entries. You find a way to win. You start doing dump and chase and you have guys that are able to adapt and do that. You play the body a little bit more and you let the goalie focus on the puck and like it'll get to you if it gets to you. Like there are so many different ways to adjust your game. And some of those truly remarkable teams, the ones that make it, they've got a lot of tools in the toolkit.
I mean, you kind of mentioned, like, for example, like changing up like what you're doing. That's even something that I think a lot of the really good teams will do is they'll pregame the other team for hours on end. And they'll start figuring, okay, how are they defending our rushes? Okay, like the carry-ins aren't working. All right, fine. We're going to completely switch gears. We're going to go to dump and chase.
Yeah.
We'll send all the depth guys out to fetch it from the corners, get our better defensemen out for keeps at the blue line. And we'll just slowly rotate the better guys into the zone. Like stuff like that happens.
Oh, all the time. If you're Tampa, you've got to be looking at this tape going, what's the deal with possession? How is Colorado controlling possession so much? And what can we do to subvert that? How do we shut them down? How do we play to whatever? Every team's got a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
How do we adjust our game? They're clearly beating what we're doing, but it's not just changing things for the sake of changing them. It's what area can we change strategically? And that's where I think we've seen in a couple of series so far this playoffs, teams getting out coached. I look back to the Edmonton Calgary series. I love Daryl Sutter. He's one of my favorite coaches of all time, but I think Woodcroft and the Oilers out-coached Daryl. Daryl Sutter wasn't matching lines, wasn't adjusting. He was playing the same hard way that he was. Sometimes that doesn't work. The best thing in the world can not work sometimes. And how do you change it up? How do you adapt? I think there have been a couple of series, even the Wild against the Blues. I think the Blues just out-coached more than anything. I'm curious. Again, John Cooper is obviously a genius. Like we love John Cooper. It's an interesting series. I don't know. I love this stuff.
I mean, you brought up the Calgary Edmonton series, right? Like that's one thing I really think the Oilers did well was they acknowledged, okay, you're not going to out-grit the Flames. You're not going to out-check them. So what are you going to do? You just have to outskate them. You have to be quicker. You have to be
And
just
that's
a
what they did.
little bit smarter with your passes, and you'll get over that hump.
That was a team that actually utilized, I feel like, a lot of the dump and chase because they realized like we're not getting through the neutral zone. They're bucking us off the puck. Like we're not getting through there, but they have the speed and the skill to dump it in and get through there to beat some guys. Like they were able to utilize that. And then they've got the firepower. I think that's where like a Zach Hyman thrived in that playoff series because he was strong enough to be able to win those puck battles, but he was also fast and skilled at like working with McDavid, working with Draisaitl. Like he was a fantastic complementary piece, like that just rounded out a skill set they needed to adapt.
And like that was the thing with like Edmonton, they kind of were in a unique spot this playoff where they knew everybody was going to be gunning for McDavid. Everybody was going to be gunning for Draisaitl or Nugent
Evander
Hopkins. So you know
Kane.
what they did? They told those players, you know what? We'll use you more as setup players and let the other players score the goals. Like you said, Zach Hyman was fantastic these playoffs.
Yeah.
Evan Bouchard added, I think, a lot of really good offense from the defensive pair.
Evan Bouchard was a huge, pleasant surprise for the Oilers defense for me. I remember when he was drafted, I was actually kind of glad we didn't take him because at the time the working theory was he's the most NHL ready, but it's also much closer to where his peak is, where his potential like bottoms out, as opposed to some of the other guys that might have been more long term, but they had higher upsides. Bouchard is sort of showing that that's not the case. That he keeps getting better and better, and he took his game to another level in these playoffs. And part of that I think is because of Keith.
Mm-hmm.
It's that mentor bringing in a young defenseman, which he was well versed in doing in Chicago. But with the Oilers, there was higher stakes and more to be able to be like, hey, let's go. You can defend? Cool. Let's start to work on this.
I don't know. I really do think that coaching that can adapt strategies is what gets a lot of these teams deep into the playoffs. Like understanding, like, you know what, these tactics that have worked aren't working anymore. We have to change out of necessity. And it
100%.
works.
100%. Again, that's why coaches are so important. Which again, why Pete DeBoer is on his 4th or 5th coaching job in 5 years is kind of ridiculous. But
I mean, we're kind of you brought up Pete DeBoer, and I've got to just ask really quick. I mean, technically, we're talking about the playoffs here with like, you know, the Lightning and the Colorado Avalanche. But I got to ask, like, what are either of the Wings or the Hawks doing with a head coach position? Because literally all of the names have been snatched up. It seems like.
That said, well, Barry Trotz turned down a huge offer with the Flyers.
Oh, is it like $7 million?
It was like
or
$7 million
something?
on a multiple year. He would have been the highest paid coach in like history. And he said no, which is wild. And then they brought in Tortorella. Like all I will say, I'm happy for the Wings and the Hawks that Tortorella's already taken, that DeBoer is taken, and that Mike Yao Mike Yao or Yao, however you pronounce it, is going to be an assistant coach with one of the teams. I don't remember who, but he's going to be an assistant coach. Thank God. I was so terrified that one of us was going to end up with. I feel bad because Torts is a polarizing figure. Some players love him. Some players hate him. I think that his style is out of date. I don't think that he adapts well. It's a lot of the antithesis of what I believe is modern hockey. But that said, he does get results for a while. But also the Flyers aren't going to be very good.
No.
Like he's not a guy but if it's a team full of 3rd and 4th line guys, that's kind of where he thrives, which is stupid, but like it is what it is.
I think my problem with Tortorella, especially for the Wings, is it seems like he doesn't let the creative players be creative. He very much wants to play structured hockey, which I get it.
Which is great.
At some point, you have to let your players have some freedom.
The Hawks would never have been the Hawks if Patrick Kane wasn't allowed to be Patrick Kane. If all of a sudden, if Ovechkin in his youth was required to play a 2-way game, that's not why they're there. Like Phil Kessel is not there for that. Like you've got your guys that are offensive firepower. There are other guys on the team. my fear is, he goes to the Red Wings and all of a sudden Lucas Raymond is, nope, there's no way. You've got to play a two-way game. We got to tighten this up. Jacob Vrana, whatever it is. And all of a sudden their scoring dries up. Like, I'm glad that Torts and I don't like DeBoer's coaching style.
Mm-mm.
It's not lost on me that he's lost 4 jobs. And like, you get fired as a coach.
Right.
That happens, but not that often. And also not that often, and not going from like head coach to head coach to head coach to head coach. Like, nobody does that in that sort of time frame.
Nobody makes that many changes that quickly.
Yeah.
Like most teams, if you go to a head coaching position, they at least give you 3 to 4 years, as long as you're somewhat doing the job well.
Again, part of that can be said that the Golden Knights are making panic decisions.
I mean, to be fair, they've kind of been burning bridges with just about everybody in the NHL.
They quickly turned from being the most beloved team a couple of years ago to everyone's rooting for them to lose. Like, that's a rough, and that's all on their management. That's all on the ownership and the management.
The thing is, like, they haven't really, it seems like, had loyalty to anybody. Like,
no.
Gerard Gallant, what? How?
Gerard Gallant, Fleury, those are 2 that immediately jump to mind for me that are like beloved, still good staples that were the faces of that organization, and without a second thought. And again, it's a business. You've got to be you got to be able to separate it. But there's also bad business. Like, being cutthroat for the sake of being cutthroat is terrible business as well. I don't know what we're going to do. I've seen Todd, because Bruce Cassidy he's now with the Vegas Golden Knights. Todd Reardon is still an option. Jeremy Colleton is still out there, I think.
Yeah, he's still out there.
For you. Is Blashill still available?
Yeah, he's still available.
I wouldn't hate Blashill, but that said, if we go Blashill, I might as well just keep King.
Yeah, I feel like Blashill, the Hawks could take him on if they really wanted to go rebuild style.
If we trade DeBrincat, we are.
Like, I feel like if the Blackhawks if they're serious about this rebuild and they really do, I mean, I never advocate for scorched earth because that just makes your locker room awful.
It makes your locker room awful, and it has no guarantee of results.
But I do think that if they look at, whoever they have in their pipeline, who they realistically want to keep for, the next 7-8 years, however long, they could bring Jeff Blashill in and say, we saw what you did with Detroit with getting a lot of their rookies to improve. We want you to do the same thing here in Chicago with a lot of our players. I could see something like that happening because Dylan Larkin improved a lot under Jeff Blashill.
I agree 100%.
Moritz Seider in his one season with the NHL with Jeff Blashill looked pretty good. You've got, I've said it before, Tatar, Nyquist, those are NHL caliber players who worked with Jeff Blashill during development. Anthony Mantha, even Jeff Blashill development. The guy, if you really do want an NHL caliber roster of players, he's the guy to get you that group. He's not the one to get you to the playoffs, but if you want that group, he can get you that group.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And we're not looking for playoffs right now. I feel like we've got our pick of the litter of non-traditional coaching candidates.
I mean, both of the big names over in Europe that I want are both available still, Ronberg and Abbott.
They're still available. Like I said, some of the young guys, or not young guys per se, but I know we were interviewing, I think, the defensive coach of the Montreal Canadiens. There's a lot of like assistant coaches that are still on the board that could potentially make the jump. It's the retreads are the ones that are taken up now. So keeps us from trying to do the same old thing. I mean, again, not Bruce Boudreau. Claude Julien is still available.
Claude Julien, man.
Right? That's a name from the olden days. I could see I could see Claude Julien potentially for the Red Wings. I mean, I'm not crazy about it, but I could see it.
It's kind of weird, but with how long it's taking them to find and like say who their head coach is, I I'm just trying to think of who takes this long to announce their head coach position.
Apparently both of our teams. Because I thought the Hawks had announced that they were going to announce it by the draft.
I mean, what's the draft in a couple weeks, right?
Yeah. Like we gotta announce it soon. We can't wait too long because like development starts after that and like all the planning of the season. Like King is still, twiddling his thumbs trying to figure out what his future is. That said, the Panthers are interviewing a bunch of coaches, and their coach, the one that took over after Quenneville that got a Jack Adams nomination, he doesn't know what's going to be happening. So he might be available, which I think the Red Wings should snag him up.
I don't know. I would honestly really like them to grab Barry Trotz. I mean, Barry Trotz
would be great. Yeah.
He was huge during Washington's runs.
Oh, absolutely. And he's proof to me. I get that he brought in a defensive system and like the Islanders played boring hockey. The Capitals didn't.
No.
So I feel like he uses the strengths of each of the teams that he's got.
Yeah, like the Capitals didn't play trap.
No, exactly. Like he didn't just bring his system that worked. He didn't bring his typical bag from, okay, we took it from Washington, now we're going to do it in New York. He clearly set up a different style in New York. So there's no reason to think that he can't, have the way that things worked in Washington, the way things worked in New York. He comes to Detroit and says, okay, what do I have? How do I build it? And that's a good coach.
We talked about it with the playoffs. The best coaches look at what they have to work with and what they're going against, and then they figure out what's gonna work. Barry Trotz did it in New York just like he did in Washington. Washington played, I think, a pretty high event game. They knew they had offensive power in Kuznetsov, in Ovechkin, in Backstrom, in Tom Wilson, in TJ Oshie, in John Carlson, and Brooks Orpik. Like he knew they had offensive firepower, so he just let it loose.
Yeah. And if I remember correctly, Trotz took over right after John Tavares left.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they weren't we had them at as like a bottom 5 team. See how that went.
And I mean, this year they let him go after a bunch of injuries that were plaguing their roster where they could not be healthy.
After they traded Devontae's away for 2 second-round picks, which
that's a burner.
Listen, I get it. Lou Lamoriello is a genius. He's an all-time Hall of Fame GM. You can have a bad trade. Everyone can have that was a bad trade.
That wasn't a bad trade. That was a steal.
That was a highway robbery. That's an Yzerman level move. And now look at Colorado. I'd say he was worth 2 second-round picks.
Absolutely. They're playing in the Cup Finals right now.
And he's their like number 2 defenseman. He'd be a number 1 on a lot of teams, but Cale Makar is by default here number 1.
I mean, as he should be, to be fair.
No, Cale Makar is, again, I think Cale Makar is tied with Adam Fox for best defenseman in the league, frankly. And I no disrespect to Moritz Seider, but being able to have a defensive capability like they've got and the offensive firepower, and they're also several years older.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to see what Seider's at in 2-3 years.
But that's the thing is like, it seems like a lot of these teams that are really up and coming with, these defensemen, you do kind of see like the polarity between the styles of defensemen. Like Cale Makar, in my eyes, can he play a two-way game? Yeah, he can play a two-way game, but let's be honest, he really excels at the offensive side.
Let him fly, but he's not a liability.
Yeah,
is the thing.
And so like Colorado lets him do that. They let him play with a lot of other really offensive minded players. Detroit plays Moritz Seider very differently. They'll put him in an offensive situation, but they are not expecting him to constantly be bringing the offense. They want him playing defense.
Yeah. I mean, to me, Keith was a true two-way defenseman where he chipped in offensively. He had a great passing ability that got plays going, but he was defense for like he was always out there with defensive responsibility. And if he had a Hjalmarsson with him, he was able to fly a little more offensively, but he just adapted to whatever situation he was in. When I think of offensive defensemen, I think of Erik Karlsson, I think of Brett Burns, guys like that where they are all offense.
Mm-hmm.
Like they can, because of the style of game they play, they can also be a defensive liability. Cale Makar, you can trust to do. It's the same as Adam Fox. It's the same as Victor Hedman, who's a little closer to Seider's style of play, I think, than Makar and Fox, but you're able to trust them to pinch a little bit more, to take that extra risk because they're not a defensive liability. They know their responsibilities.
And like we've talked about, defensemen who can skate, that allows them to be just a little bit better offensively, because if they make a bad read, they're quicker to get back to that puck.
And again, you've also got a team around you that you can trust to pick up the slack. Like there's a lot to be said about that too.
Yeah.
Guys can play their game a little freer and more comfortably if they aren't all. I think that's what hurt Keith the last couple of years with us. He couldn't play his game the same way because if he did anything out of line, there was nobody to look out for him.
No, and that's the thing when you have to quote unquote carry a lot, a pair or a line by yourself.
You're just not able to do the things that on a team with other supporting characters you can.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, like you mentioned, Keith is, I think, the best example of that, right? And I stand by these words. I think that after Nick Lidstrom retired, Duncan Keith became the best two-way defenseman in the NHL.
And I agree with you on both. Like the statement, I think after Lindros, yeah, for sure.
I don't think it's any secret though. Once Duncan Keith started losing other partners that he could really depend on and having another cast in front of him where he could say, I can, like you said, pinch a little bit at this spot to get a better angle. That's when you start to see a lot of his downturn in his production.
I mean, it's you can play a little looser and freer when you've got peak Jonathan Toews and Marian Hossa and Brandon. There were so many guys, even Andrew Shaw, were all guys that were defensively responsible on top of their, physical and, offensive ability. He counted. He had Hjalmarsson, he had Seabrook, he had Campbell. My God, Bufflin played on all over whether he was a forward or a defenseman or whatever. You had such a cast of characters that Duncan Keith could be the prototypical two-way, the fast puck moving, great stick check, could play the body if he needed to, could chip in offensively because everyone was working as a unit.
I think it's interesting, especially in these playoffs, watching these younger players when they play on these teams, seeing how they perform. Because Cale Makar has never been this deep in the playoffs before.
No, certainly not.
But he's rising to that occasion. He's saying, okay, I can do what I do best. And coaching staff just lets him do it.
But again, good coaching staff. They know their players. They know the capabilities of the players. They have faith in their players. They let them do what they got to do. They also don't sweat because they can change things up.
And that's something a lot of teams can't do.
I did want to point out, it is now end of the first. Tampa is up 2-1.
Okay.
Andre Palat got the second goal for Tampa. So it ain't over yet, folks. It's a long way to go.
He's up to UFA this season or this offseason, isn't he?
Andre, is he really?
I think he might be.
God, I remember when it was the triplets line back in 2015 when we played, and it was Kucherov, Tyler Johnson, and Andre Palat were this group of kids on the third line. And I'm like, oh, this is really cool. They're really good. Fast forward, here we are. Andre Palat could be a huge acquisition on somebody's team.
And he's not going to command 8 or 9 million. I think he'll command probably 5 or 6.
he's like that perfect top six on again, I would consider 5 or 6 mil for a top six guy cheap, not cheap, but reasonable.
It's reasonable. If you
Yeah,
you can convince them like, hey, take a little bit of a discount. You can see what we already have built over here. You can be like a finishing piece.
exactly. Like that's a guy that rounds out your top six.
I mean, 6 million for him. I would do 6 mil for Andre Palat.
Oh God, yeah. Again, if you're a team that's ready for the playoffs or needs to kick up that next step to like go deep in the playoffs, that's worth it. I mean,
Yeah,
that's
and
when you swing for, right? Maybe if I'm Edmonton, but Edmonton doesn't have the money because they gotta get. I think that Bobrovsky, if they really will retain 50%, getting Bobrovsky for 5 mil would be a huge answer for Edmonton.
that'd be a huge answer for basically
I
any
mean, yeah,
playoff team
anybody.
who's missing a starter.
Yeah.
It, I I've said it before. I don't like the $10 million contracts with goalies unless they show up every single game.
Which, truth be told, Carey Price did.
But the problem is once that player doesn't, it's not good.
Yeah.
It's
and
like
goalies are so. It's not like a forward or a defenseman. Goalies are so hot and cold. I don't know, 10 mil on any goalie is terrifying.
It's crazy because for every hot goaltender who you get, you also get one who goes ice cold out of nowhere that's overpaid. I mean, Matt Murray for the Pittsburgh Penguins and the Ottawa Senators, like
unreal.
A guy who went to Stanley Cup Finals with them, helped them win a cup, and now
and every year we're also seeing goaltenders that we've never heard of, or we're like career backups, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, guess you decided to have a borderline Vezina caliber year. Okay, cool. You're on league minimum." The goalies are weird. It's a total. The position is the hardest to quantify.
And for me, I feel like it really $5 or $6 million is the most you should spend on a goaltender. And
I agree.
I know a lot of people are like, but what about the star caliber goaltenders?
What about
the problem is there's that drop off, and when the goaltender drops off, the whole team drops off.
Well, that's the thing. It's not like if a forward goes cold and you've got 11 other forwards on the ice that can pick up some slack. If your goalie goes cold, that's it.
That's it. You're done.
And if you've got 9 million in a goalie, you don't have 3 million in a backup. Like you've got a guy who's on under a mil. And what do? You're paying a guy. I mean, Florida had this issue this year. Spencer Knight is great. He's a wonderful rookie and he should be getting more reps. But what are you going to do? Bench your $10.5 million goalie that's got 7 or 6 more years on his contract?
You can't, because you have too much money tied up.
Yeah, you can't do it. You know, I've seen teams where it's like the Hawks did it with Seabrook for a bit, where it's like, yeah, he's making 6.8 mil a year, but like, listen, tonight you're our 7th best defenseman. I'm sorry. You can't do that with goalie.
And if you do it with a goalie, it's really hard to justify that.
Well, it also tanks their trade value.
That too.
They're not going to win that trade. Whatever they do, if they really do move Bobrovsky, there's no winning that.
Florida can never win a Sergei Bobrovsky trade as long as he is making $9 million a year.
He's making like 10.5.
Oh yeah, he did. No, who's making $9 million a year? There's another.
Vasilevsky's
a $9 million
which,
one.
Listen, if there's a goalie that justifies it, it might be Vasilevsky.
But that's the thing, is like, I don't think I've ever seen Vasilevsky really go cold for stretches. I've seen like a cold game or two, but never like a cold stretch.
I mean, my God, he's bounced back from a 7-0 game, and he's got currently, he's fine right now. He's that good.
But so, like, that's the thing. Goaltenders are they're so polarizing. Like you can get one that will steal games for $4-5 million, just like an elite goaltender will.
That's exactly it. That said, the only way Florida wins this trade is if they can convince somebody to take him and not have to waive any money or not have to retain any money. And I don't think that's possible because he's got a no trade clause.
He's got no trade clause. And then on top of that, what team around the NHL goes, yes, we'd like to pay $10 million for a goaltender who, as of right now, isn't even putting up like a 92 save percent?
Buffalo. I mean, if you think that you need a goaltender, I know they've got Ukko-Pekka Laitinen, but if they think like we need a goaltender, we have the money, we think that he's hot and cold, but we think he can, get back to it. Maybe you take a swing. Like Arizona, there's no reason.
No.
Arizona's trying to be bad. Getting Bobrovsky with the risk that he could be good is not worth it to them to pay. Montreal has Carey Price. Otherwise, I think they might have gone for, like, you've got to have a team that's got the right set of needs and like situations. That's why Buffalo is the only one that makes sense to me, because Edmonton retained. Edmonton with the 50% retained, or even enough to get it to, maybe it's not 5.5, maybe it's 6. And if they move things around, Bobrovsky could be exactly what they need.
It's so wild to me that we're talking about Sergei Bobrovsky potentially being traded. Because what was it, 2 years ago, he was putting up Vezina caliber goaltender numbers?
Yeah. But he's always been hot. Like, I feel like he's an every other year goalie. I think it was the right move for Columbus to walk and not give him the 10.5 mil.
Yeah, in hindsight, that is a really good move on their part.
They clearly saw enough. They said, okay, we've got Elvis Merzlikins, we've got Jonas Korpisalo. We can't justify it. And yeah, because that was the year I think he was a legitimate Vezina caliber Vezina nominee. And they just said, nah, bye.
It's just so fascinating what is coming about as a result of just this whole Stanley Cup playoffs this year in general. And we haven't even talked about, Nick Backstrom for the Washington Capitals is probably going to be out for about a year, and it might be permanent depending on how he handles it.
I mean, it's the same story with Patrice Bergeron. He's doing like a hip reshaping, and apparently nobody in the NHL has ever come back from that. Like that could be again, the Capitals. What do they do without Backstrom? Certainly Boston. What do they do without Bergeron? Like, that's it. That's a rebuild at that point.
That's like, if Boston loses Bergeron, who was their second best center? Like, who is it? As
Charlie Coyle? Because Krejci was gone.
But that's what I'm saying. Like,
is it Charlie Coyle? I hope not, because that's not great.
But like, oops, there goes the top 6 center, or for Boston's case, there goes your number 1 center.
Yeah. Pasternak has already talked about potentially leaving. At that point, you trade Marchand, which is so awful. Like, I can't imagine him being anything but a Bruin. Like, he is a Bruin. But I don't know. At least with Washington, they've got enough depth that I think they can justify trying to survive without Backstrom. I think it sucks. You lost your number 1C. Maybe Kuznetsov is able to move up at that point and play between Ovechkin and whoever. And maybe you're able to move up a younger guy that might be ready. I think they have a better shot at like trying to fight for 1 or 2 more years before they blow everything up, because they're going to try and get Ovechkin as much as possible.
Like the Capitals, I think they still can compete without Backstrom, but it gets a lot harder.
The Bruins have they lost Krejci. They let Chara walk.
Kruger's gone. Tuukka Rask is gone.
Tuukka Rask is gone. If Bergeron's gone too, like, that really, they are a team. I will give them a lot of credit. From 2011, when they won the cup, to now, they have not rebuilt.
No.
They have stayed. They were out of the playoffs for like 1 or 2 years, but they have been able to stay. They've kept that window open and they've stayed consistent in that time, and they've played competitive hockey. That's I mean, even the Kings came close to having to fully rebuild, but they were able to sort of do the same ebb and flow that the Bruins have. That said, if the Kings lost Kopitar, I don't think, and say they lost Kopitar, Quick, and Doughty, which is the equivalent of Boston losing Bergeron, Tuukka Rask, and Chara. You don't have an option left.
And the thing is, like, Pasternak's talking about, or it sounds like wants to leave.
Yeah, it sounds like that camp isn't. They're not finding that common ground in the negotiation. It if you've got Charlie McAvoy and Marchand, I like Swayman. I like Swayman more than I like Lars Ulmark, but they've got good pieces, but I just don't see them being competitive.
They've got good pieces, but they don't have, or they're starting to
They don't have a
lose the
core.
super high end pieces.
Yeah, they've got a bunch of good pieces, but they don't have a core in my mind.
And like the Boston Bruins have also gotten really lucky with some of their draft picks. Like they're lucky Marchand panned out. They got lucky that Krug panned out. They got lucky that Pasternak panned out the way he did.
Yeah, 100%.
Like if Pasternak hadn't hit, and if
we'd have a totally different conversation.
Yeah, you like the Bruins would probably be out of the playoffs.
I agree. And again, like I like Brandon Carlo. I think he's a good defenseman. He's not a top line guy. No disrespect if Brandon Carlo listens to the podcast. I love you.
It is interesting though how some of these teams, I mean, and we talked about also New York kind of also did the same thing. They hit on a couple of really important picks and got a couple important pieces out of free agency that worked for them.
New York, though, is a weird one because they full out declared a rebuild.
Yeah.
Like they hit a point where they said, we're going to rebuild. We're not going to be good anymore. Like they got rid of Lundqvist. They didn't really sell anybody off. I mean, they traded off McDonough, which was the captain. But they kept Kreider, they kept Zibanejad, they signed Panarin, and then they got stupid lucky with the draft lottery. Because that's how they got Kakko, and that's how they got Lafreniere was lottery picks. All of a sudden you're like, I guess we're not going to rebuild anymore. Yeah, I guess not.
I mean, Ken Holland kind of used to talk about, like retooling on the fly. Those are situations, though, where the clubs did retool on the fly. And what allowed that to happen? Draft picks hitting and very intelligent free agent moves.
It's the same argument with Colorado. 5 years ago, they were one of the worst. They were dead last in the league, basically. Pro scouting and player development and smart free agent signings. That's it. Because they didn't they got some really good high picks, but they also have a lot of guys that they drafted later, with phenomenal scouting. They took guys that were drafted a little later and they developed them. They took guys that were first round picks and they said, okay, cool. We're going to make sure that you pan out. Like when you combine analytics, you combine pro scouting, you combine development, you can go in 5 years from dead last in the league to in the Stanley Cup final. That's why Buffalo, that's why Arizona, that's why Edmonton has struggled. It's that lack of, you might have one, you might have two, you need the development, you need the pro scouting, you need to be able to get a guy in from free agency. You can't just rely on trades and hoping that high picks pan out.
And that's the thing. Colorado hasn't done that, unlike teams like Edmonton or Toronto have done.
Yeah. I mean, Toronto got lucky that guys have panned out.
Yeah. But Tampa, for example, right? They haven't really been picking very high in the drafts all that much. And they found players deeper in the drafts. I mean,
Ross
Kucherov
Colton
was a
was
surprise.
yeah,
Vasilevsky was a surprise. Point was a surprise.
yeah.
Like
Braden Point was a 3rd-round pick.
Druin was a surprise. No, he was what, free agency from them, right?
Druin was a 1st-round pick, I think.
Or no, he went. No, he went to Montreal
Yeah,
from.
he was traded to Montreal. They got Sergachev from him,
Yeah, but
which was a phenomenal deal, especially. But Yzerman also didn't mind keeping guys in the AHL for a bit.
and that's the thing is like if you have smart drafting, smart development, and you can make smart trades, you can stay competitive and stay
Yeah,
relevant.
100%. The Hawks, I mean, one of our 1st or 2nd-round picks during the kind of dynasty was like Graham Knott, who never played in the NHL. We did not have good. The last NHL defenseman we truly developed was Nicholas Hjalmarsson, who was a 2005 draft pick. Like Duncan Keith was 2002, Seabrook was 2003. I mean, Saad and Shaw were at least, 2nd-round picks that they were able to get. Awesome. They were able to develop forwards pretty decently, but they couldn't develop anything else.
Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Like when you look at both of these teams that are in the Stanley Cup Finals right now, the Colorado Avalanche and the Tampa Bay Lightning,
Yeah.
each of those teams has had really good depth drafting,
Yep.
good free agency signings, and great trading for value for positions that they need. That seems to be what gets you to the finals and makes you dangerous year in and year out.
That said, we are 5 minutes into the 2nd period, and Tampa Bay is up 3-2 against Colorado. We had Nick Paul score for Tampa Bay and Gabriel Landeskog on the power play for the Avalanche. So yeah, both teams scored, but Tampa's still up.
I would like to see that, like, whoever wins this cup win it at home. I'm trying to think who the last team
It's
was to win
always
it
so
at home.
cool. We won it at home in 2015.
But like that is such a feel good for the fans who are there at the hometown arena if they win.
Oh my God. Listen, Chicago was electric in 2015. It was one of the coolest things in the world. Like the whole city just erupted. Yeah, there's nothing like it. And I remember Taze even saying, like, we've won the cup twice already. I'd really like to win it at home. And they did. Again, beating Tampa Bay, which were the young upstarts. Like, it's super exciting. I always hope that the team wins it at home just because it is really, really cool.
But no, we kind of went off on a little bit of a tangent for a while, but
it's not like there's much to talk about. Like, I think we can afford a tangent.
yeah. But no, that's kind of it. Like, that's the final so far. Like, Colorado has had just such a great possession game against Tampa, and it's kind of weird because a couple of years ago they had that freak year where they were not good. They grabbed Cale Makar at 4th.
Yeah.
And then they grabbed Bowen Byram at 4th, right?
Yep. But that was that's because they had Ottawa's pick.
Yeah, they made some crazy trade that panned out completely.
It was the
in their
Duchesne
favor.
trade. It was the Matt Duchesne trade.
Yeah.
Because Matt Duchesne went to Ottawa and they got back like 2 first-round picks. Like
No, he went to Nashville, I thought.
No, he went to Ottawa and then signed in Nashville.
Okay.
Yeah, because remember he got traded to Ottawa, and then he's one of the guys that got caught in the cab or the Uber, whatever, being recorded bad mouthing.
Oh yes,
Ottawa.
Yes,
bad mouthing like other player, like venting about other players and like coaching and stuff like that. Which stinks. Like you get off work, you just want to vent a little bit, and some cabbie takes a photo of you. Like that's rough, but like yeah, because he was in Ottawa for that at that point.
I forgot all about that.
That was such a scandal. But yeah, Jordan, just to wrap this up, who do you got? Who do you think's pulling this off there, getting the Holy Grail?
I mean, I gotta put my money on Colorado. I put my money on them when we did the brackets before the whole playoffs started.
There you go.
They just look too good. Like, even if Tampa takes this one, they just looked so stupid good.
I'm in the same boat. I was gonna pull Colorado. Just I think that they've got the momentum.
They've got the momentum. They don't have as much expectation on them coming
And,
in this year as Tampa did.
and there's a lot of miles on Tampa.
That too. Tampa has been here twice, went all
And,
the way twice.
and aside from the year they got swept in the first round, they've played long hockey for several years. I mean, it caught up to the Hawks, it caught up to Pittsburgh, it caught up to the King. Like catches up to everybody. I think the Avalanche are faster.
They're faster. They seem to be executing better. And like possession, it matters.
Possession's it. Possession's 9 tenths of the law, baby. Like that's it. Okay, so we're both on for Colorado.
Now, here's the important question. How many does Colorado win it in?
I think 6.
Okay.
I think that there's no way that Tampa's going to fight tooth and nail.
I think I would bet Colorado wins 6. I mean, Tampa's up this game 3-2, you said, right?
Yeah, I think that there's a high likelihood that they win this game just because Tampa's going to fight back. I just don't see them giving this one up. Watch, like we'll round out this game that I'll be texting the group chat, just be like, oh, well, don't mind me. They lost another prediction. But I think it's got to be 6.
Colorado wins 6. That's
All
the
right.
prediction.
Here we go. We're in complete unison. That is not common. I don't think it goes to 7. I think that there's one of these two teams is going to find a way to make it out.
One of them will find it, and again,
once they do, they're going to hit the ice. Yeah, absolutely.
No, I think it's in 6, and I'm not actively rooting for the Avalanche because I mean the rivalry's still there. But man, it's so weird.
I kind of am.
It's so weird rooting for the team that kicked your team out of the playoffs in the first round multiple years in
No, I get that. I 100% get that. I could never root for Nashville. I mean, I obviously hate the Blues, but like Nashville's the one that I think of that like swept us in 2017 and really marked the end of the era. I could never root for them. But I mean, do we really want to see the three-peat?
I only want to see it because we're probably
cool,
never going to see it again in our lifetime.
I mean, the last time we saw it was the Islanders in the 80s. Like, and neither, I don't think I certainly wasn't alive. I don't know if you were.
Nope, I wasn't.
It'd be kind of cool.
If they get the three-peat, though, I don't want them to get the 4th.
No, I want it to blow up. I want it all to unravel after that. That all the wheels fall off. They can't. 3 is the limit.
I mean,
because then they'd have as many cups in the salary cap era as Chicago and Pittsburgh. I don't want them to have more.
No, 3 is the magic number.
Yep.
But I think that's it for our show tonight. Like I said, unfortunately, there wasn't really a ton to talk about for the Wings of the Hawks. But again, it's the off season for both clubs, so
there will be more as it gets closer to the draft. Right now, everything for the Hawks is all rumors.
And that's the thing. Like, eventually, we'll have head coaching changes that have been announced in terms of like who's taking over the positions. Mm-hmm. The draft is coming up here pretty soon. Actually, the Calder Cup's about to wrap here. The Calder Trophy itself is going to get awarded here soon. Yeah, I think it's tomorrow, actually.
Wait, for what?
The Calder Trophy?
Oh, are you talking about for
Rookie of the Year?
Rookie?
Yeah.
Okay, I was going to say, might be. I haven't paid attention.
But that gets announced pretty soon, I think. So there is going to be stuff to talk about for both of these clubs, just not at the moment. But yeah, that's kind of our show tonight. Like I said, a weird one because there's not much to talk about. And unfortunately, David and Nick couldn't join us tonight. But for everyone who is tuning in and watching and listening, we appreciate you guys tuning in and watching and listening. At the end of the day, it's a show that's by fans for fans. There's no corporate sponsorship. Everybody can just say what they want, which is awesome. And you get hot takes, you get hometown takes, away takes, balanced conversations usually because both of us are from different fan base areas. But yeah, that's it for our show tonight. As always, feel free to check us out on either Facebook, Twitter, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts. We're on Google Podcasts now, so it's another venue you can find us. I mean, shoot, even old-fashioned email if that's what you want to do, stickbladepodcast@gmail.com. Just ample ways you can get in touch with the show and contact with us. Feedback, criticism, stuff like that. It's all welcome. It's a way that we improve the show. But again, for your host tonight, Jordan Linscott, and for my co-host, Tim Stompanato, this has been another edition of the Stick Blade Podcast. And we'll catch you guys all here next week. Maybe when the Stanley Cup Finals are over. We'll see. But in the meantime, we'll catch you guys later. And you guys take care. Stay safe. See you here next time.